The 5th annual Louisiana Book Festival attracted 12,000 participants to downtown Baton Rouge and represented over 100 authors. Join us as we celebrate readers, writers, and their books with highlights from the 2007 Louisiana Book Festival, featuring authors Chris Rose and David Kirby. From the Capitol Building to the State Library, the festival is packed with activities for all ages and interests. A meaningful hallmark of the book festival is the public access to authors. Their lectures and discussions often share the publishing side of the business as well as the broader scope of their lives, while giving insight to their development as writers. After Hurricane Katrina, Times-Picayune columnist Chris Rose began writing emotionally charged reports from a devastated New Orleans, providing information and solace to a scattered populace. His humor and irony became counterpoint to the torment and ruin surrounding him. Rose self-published 4 months of these poignant columns in his book, One Dead in Attic.
You know, last year I was here in this chamber, and it was really easy because there were a couple of us sitting here and there was a moderator for the discussion, which I always find to be very easy because I don't work well with prepared remarks. The reason being is because that's a lot of work to write a speech. So I thought that's what I was doing this year until I just got here, and then I found out it's just me standing at a podium. So I don't really know where to go with this because different people want to talk about different things. It says book talk, so I don't know what that means. I can tell you what's in the book, but you probably read it, or you're going to. You don't need to know that. I could tell you how the book came about, or I could just hope, and here's what I tell some people that when I don't know what to say, if someone just asks me one question, I could probably talk for the next 90 minutes without stopping. I'm not used to book festivals. This is all kind of new to me, being in the literary world, being a rock star. So I'll just tell you quickly the story of how the book did happen, and then I will be happy to answer questions. On August 29th, 2005, I guess my life, like everybody in this room, dramatically changed. Up to that point, I was, I guess, not that well known. I had a small and ardent following for my work in the Times-Picayune, which was of a completely different nature than it is now. If any of you were around back then and reading my stuff in the living section, I was an entertainment columnist, and I put that in quotes because basically what I was a overpaid celebrity stalker. I was the paparazzi with a pen. I look back, I don't disavow that work that I did. It was entertaining and a lot of fun, at least for me, but I don't think it carried much weight. Now, I have a lot of people say to me now, wow, you've been on Oprah, you've got a book, you're on TV, you get to do all this stuff, you're famous, this must be a lot of fun. And I go, no, this isn't fun at all. This actually kind of sucks, what I do now. I'll tell you what was fun was my old job. What was fun was hanging out at the House of Blues on a Saturday night, running up a $140 bar tab on the Times-Picayune, waiting for Jessica Simpson to come out of the ladies' room. That was fun. But after August 29th, my beat kind of disappeared. And I just did what everybody at the paper did who could get back in the city. Many of us transformed ourselves. We had an odd gathering, about 12 of us in a makeshift bureau on Laurel Street uptown. And I looked around one day, and it was the art critic, it was me, it was an editorial writer, it was the Saints beat writer, it was the music writer. This odd collection of people. We were in there covering this thing that was happening in the city, and I looked around one day and I said, what the hell are we doing here? Where are the real reporters? Why are we in here covering this thing? It just so happened that people who could get in just charged in, and we just started covering the story as it unfolded to us. Now, when I got in there about 6 days after the storm, we had several people in place. We already had somebody at the Superdome, somebody at the Convention Center. We had somebody out doing the search and rescues, someone with the cops. So I kind of foundered around to figure out what it was I was supposed to do. Now, this was without any particular editorial guidance or leadership, and I should just veer off for a second here to explain how it is that a good newspaper, becomes a great newspaper and starts winning Pulitzer Prizes. What happened at the evacuation of the storm is, like I said, reporters and photographers sort of based themselves in New Orleans, but management and the editorial staff had to relocate to Baton Rouge. So if you want to know how to make a great newspaper, what you do is take management and put them 65 miles away from the staff. Is it a coincidence that we won 2 Pulitzer Prizes that year? I don't think so. We didn't have a meeting for 6 weeks. We just went to work every day and worked. That was interesting. And then by the time we all got back together in the office on October 10th, it was too late. The staff was untamed and unruly, and we just continued to do what we've been doing. Anyway, I got to New Orleans and was trying to figure out what it was I was supposed to do. It was weird writing for a paper that wasn't actually being published and writing to an audience that was clearly spread around the country. And I decided that a lot of people were focusing on what wasn't in New Orleans anymore, and I thought, well, I don't really want to go in that water anyway. I think I'm going to stay on high ground and just write about what is still here. And so I started wandering about the city. I drove my car till it ran out of gas. Then I started riding my bicycle until I got a flat tire, and then I just started walking. But I tried to cover as much area as I could in New Orleans to see what was going on, to try to send dispatches out about what was happening, what it looked like, what it felt like, what it smelled like. And over that period of time, I guess I didn't really, I was not cognizant of it as quickly as many readers were. Even by late October or early November, I started to get a lot of emails from readers around the country who were asking me if I had thought about collecting the stories that I was writing after Katrina and putting them in a book. And the truth was, I'd had no such thought at all. It had not occurred to me. But I think readers picked up before I did that there was some sort of, continuity or thematic thread that was running through the stories and sort of becoming, a real-time memoir of what was happening in there. So I started looking at the stories in that way, and I decided, I talked to my wife, and I talked to the newspaper, and I decided, well, maybe we could do this. Maybe we could put this together. If all the people who had emailed me and said, would you put your collection of stories in a book, I'd buy it. I saved all their email addresses. And I finally had enough. I'm not stupid. So I finally realized I had enough requests for this. And I said, well, if all these people actually buy the book, we could do this. And I'd always wanted a book. I never had a book. Nobody ever came up to me and said, would you write a book for us? And so I said, this is probably my only chance to have one. And the newspaper granted me the rights to the story. And someone has asked me, I'll get to the part about it being a very successful independent publication, self-published. But someone said, you had great success self-publishing. What is the secret to self-publishing? I said, I don't think content matters. I'll tell you the secret to self-publishing is having your best friend from high school owns a really big printing press in Maryland. And he feels really bad for what happened to you in your city. And so he ran off 2,500 books at cost. And we got together with a couple music foundations in the city. I figured if we were going to generate revenue, we'd try to raise some money for the Tipitinas Foundation, New Orleans Musicians Clinic, and Art Docs. And we just thought this would be fun, and we'd get a few books around, and that I would have my own personal memoir. And we put together the first 4 months after the storm, August 29th to January 1st. And we had our opening at Tipitina's on a Sunday afternoon. It was supposed to start at 3. I started signing books at 1:30 in the afternoon. The band came in, the Cajun band that comes in at 5 o'clock. They started playing. People started waltzing around our tables. They finally threw us out on the sidewalk and assigned books until 10 o'clock that night. And we sold, I think, something like 800 or 1,200 books on the first day. And I realized that something had just happened in my life. And the first thing we did the next morning was call my friend in Maryland and say, could you make us some more books? So the book, the original version of One Dead in the Attic, the little red book, sold 65,000 copies over the next year and a half. Basically slinging them out of the trunk of my car, all this kind of stuff. We never even thought to call the local bookstores. We never called Maple Street Books or Octavia or anything. We didn't know this was going to happen, but after that Tipitina signing, they were all outside my door the next morning going, we heard you got a book. People are asking us. So in no time at all, I became a small and very successful publisher, which has its benefits and does not, because, I get a lot of people say, I've written a whole lot of poems about Katrina. Would you like to put them in a book? No. I don't. So when you sell that many books, 65,000 is apparently a pretty good number in independent publishing. In fact, I think that's a pretty respectable number in big-time publishing. So what happens is the big publishing companies started knocking around to try to get this book, and Simon and Schuster made an offer that neither I nor the Times-Picayune, which had now taken a much greater interest in these stories. I remember the editor brought me in and said, "How did you do this the first time?" And I said, "I came and asked you if I could use the stories, and you said yes." And he goes, "Okay." He said, "Well, that's not happening this time." So I'm happy to generate revenue for my beloved company, which has taken good care of me. So Simon and Schuster and my lawyers in New York, who I suddenly had because of the Times-Picayune and the Newhouse Empire, hammered out a deal, and in August of this year we came out with One Dead in Attic, which is kind of interesting. We went back and forth on a lot of different titles, what we were going to call this thing, and in the end settled on One Dead in Attic because it already had really good reviews. It had good buzz in the publishing industry, and Simon Schuster thought we'd capitalize off that rather than try to create a new product, a new brand or something. And the marketing challenge became, they'd take care of 49 states. They said, "But you got to sell this thing to people who already have a book called One Dead in Attic." I said, "I can do that. I can do that." So my sales pitch for it all along has been, the first book was the first 4 months in life after the storm, and now the book, after we redid it for Simon & Schuster, is the first 16 months after the storm. And so sometimes people go, "Yeah, but I like the little red book. It's got pictures in it." I go, "No, but it's got a whole year after. It's got the rejuvenation of the city. It's not all that sorrow. It's got the Saints, the first Mardi Gras, the first Jazz Fest." They go, "Yeah, but I like those first stories best anyway. I got the little red book. I don't need this one." And then I now have to move in for the kill. And I go, "It's got the chocolate city stuff in it." They go, "Oh, yeah, I need one. I need about 8. I need them for my family." So that's how. That's the story of the book. How was that? That's book talk. That was real book talk. Is that what you do at one of these things? Is that what this is called, book talk? We're talking about books. Yes. Why do I raise my kids in New Orleans? Ugh. There's the next book. True. I raised my kids in New Orleans because the longer. That's not about books. This isn't called kid talk. It's called book talk. I raised my children in New Orleans because I'm stuck in New Orleans because after 24 years I've learned that the longer you live in New Orleans, the more unfit you become to live anywhere else. And I say that only half in jest. Everywhere I go, I just don't feel as comfortable in my own skin as I do when I'm in the city of New Orleans. I'm allowed to be me without judgment, for the most part. It's a place that not only embraces creativity and eccentricity, it rewards it. And so that's why I'm there. So my kids are stuck on that ride. And sometimes I wonder if it's a good idea. But I do think that in the end, the children of New Orleans and the children of South Louisiana in general and South Mississippi are going to be an interesting breed of person because they understand humility and loss better than anyone else in this country ever will. Because there is one thing, in a natural disaster the size of Katrina, what happens? What's really, really hard to do is cut a really large check to someone else. That's hard, to write a check to somebody you don't know. What's a hell of a lot harder is to accept a really big check from somebody you don't know. And that's what we've done, all of us. Nobody got out without getting help. And I think the kids are picking up on that somehow. They're going to be hardwired into this. They understand loss. They understand devastation. And they get told no more than children in other communities. So I'm hoping that pays off in dividends of character. It could possibly pay off in 35 years of therapy. By that point, it won't be my problem. Moving right along. Good question. Yes? I don't know if everybody heard the question. The question basically boiled down to how did I manage to keep my own balance and sanity while covering such large imbalance and insanity. And the fact is, I didn't, and I haven't. I've paid an enormous emotional and mental price for what has happened. That's not to say I'm a victim or that anybody should feel bad for me. In fact, natural disaster turns out to be a great career move for somebody in my line of work. But the toll has been intense. I never meant to get involved in emotional writing. I had a conversation with someone the other day. The Columbia Journalism Review was doing a story about the newspaper and about my stuff in it. And also the transformation of the Times-Picayune to this, all out to the wall advocacy journalism with a lot of hard-edged writing. Even the straight news has some pretty hard stuff in it. It doesn't read like any other newspaper in the country now. Now, a lot of our readers didn't notice it as much because they're all, our readers' DNA has been rewired just as the staff has. And I often think about some of the stuff I write is so emotional and so out there, these mordant howls of protest and pain. But I wonder if you just picked one of those up and dropped it into the Cleveland Plain Dealer one day. Like if some columnist there just started going off on the deep end like I did, what would happen? Probably what happened with me, actually, was also over time not only getting the emails about doing the book, but as October went into November, into December, and actually has continued for the next 2 years, I get a lot of emails from people who read my stories and are concerned about my health, my balance, and my sanity. And probably for good reason. I've had a whole bunch of struggles. I have good days and I have bad days. We're really lucky that I'm having a good one today. Because these talks are no fun when Chris Rose is having a bad day. I'm not meaning to duck your question. A lot of it is spelled out in great detail in the book about my own emotional downfall, which it's funny when I read the stories and I put them together in the progression. There's a chapter in the book about the mental crisis, and in the beginning it all seems so funny that I was going crazy and everybody else was going crazy, and you can read this thread of absurdity that I weave through the stories, and then it finally bottoms out. And I guess my way of dealing with that, dealing with the whole tragedy, has been to kind of try to use laughter and a sense of humor to deflect it. I always have, even since I was a child. If something really disturbed me, I'd try to make a joke out of it. And that's what I did for as long as I could, until I had to seek professional help on many different levels, which I recommend everybody do once a year. No, I mean, like most people, the question is, when did you realize the cavalry wasn't coming? And I don't know whether you mean short term or long term. In the short term, it became clear to me, I was still watching it on TV like ever. I was here in Baton Rouge for the first week until I got my children evacuated and settled at my parents' house in Maryland. But I knew that the whole game was being played wrong when the buses finally arrived at the Superdome and at the convention center. And I've never written about this, and I never saw anybody who ever did. But everybody was wondering for days and days and days, where are the buses? Where are the buses? Well, I don't know if you remember the day they arrived, but they all arrived at the same time. They had been staging in South Louisiana for 5 days so that they could all arrive together in a convoy so it looked like the cavalry had saved the day. Rather than as the buses arrived from around the country, they weren't dispatched to New Orleans. Does anybody remember that? All the buses arrived in New Orleans on the same day, like they all just got here. And so it was clear from that point on that it was a television show in Washington, that it had to look good. But at that point, it already looked too bad, and there was no saving grace. Now, as far as the long-term cavalry coming, they ain't. This is our deal. I don't know. It's not about the book. Anybody have questions about the book? I don't want to get political, then I alienate everybody. I've been writing lots of happy stuff. Actually, the worse I feel, the happier my stories are. My editors have advised me to try to get out of my head and write about other people for a little while, that the internal monologue is kind of bringing everybody down. But to answer your question, how do I feel about New Orleans and am I optimistic? The best answer I can give you to that is that I'm still there. The day it breaks me is the day I go, the day I feel that my mental health is at such a crisis, or that my children's physical or emotional health is at a crisis point. Then I get the hell out. Like everyone else there, and probably everyone in this room, it's again getting back to the good days, bad days thing. I mean, there are days of great optimism and great hope, and there's other days where you see something or something befalls you that you just throw up your hands and you think this place will never get fixed. It's slow going. I did a lot of driving around town yesterday. I had to do a whole bunch of things, and I had spot to spot to spot. A lot of places I had not been in a long time. And it's a lot cleaner and it looks a lot better and there's a fresh coat of paint on a lot of stuff. Yesterday the town looked good to me, but how slow is progress? I'll tell you. My book is called One Dead in Attic. Does anybody have a copy of it? I want to read something from it real quick. Thank you for coming. Why buy the book? We can see him for free. Insult the audience as much as possible. I want to, and this kind of answers your question, and maybe it doesn't, but in the title story of One Dead in Attic, is that what you call it? Like on a record, it's the title cut. It's just the title story. I talk about the hieroglyphs that are marked on the buildings in New Orleans, which are now sort of the visual iconography of the storm, the X's and the cryptic messages left on the buildings, and how I came upon a house where instead of that, somebody didn't know the code and had spray painted One Dead in an Attic on the side of a house, and I went, whoa, we're not supposed to know that. Just use the hieroglyphs so that I don't have to think about that, please. And let's see. In some cases, there's no interpretation of the hieroglyphs needed. There's one I pass on St. Roch Avenue in the 8th Ward at least once a week. It says One Dead in the Attic. That certainly sums up the situation, no mystery there. It's spray painted there on the front of the house, and it probably will remain spray painted there for weeks, months, maybe years. A perpetual reminder of the untimely passing of a citizen, a resident, a New Orleanian, one of us. Well, I drove by that house yesterday. It still says One Dead in Attic. So, how much progress do we make? A lot. But a lot of that stuff is exactly the way it was 5 days after the storm. I was taking a friend of mine wanted to see that house, and I said, I haven't been there in a long time, let's go look at it. I guess every time I go there, I think it's going to be fixed up and painted, but it's not. They haven't even spray painted over that part. Lots of folks who have redone their houses, I wrote a story about this a couple weeks ago, have actually preserved those markings. They've boxed them and framed them in, some to remind them of how pissed off they are, and some to wear it as some sort of badge of honor or disgrace. I'm not quite sure what, but anyway. That was about the book, turns out. It's only $15. I don't care. When I self-published, I worry about that stuff. I'm a Simon and Schuster now, man. I don't care what you people do. Yes. A rumor that I'm writing another book. Well, I don't know, maybe. Here's the answer to that, since it's book talk. And I should pitch my next book, since you're all such an avid book-buying audience. So I crack myself up. I don't know, a lot of people don't think I'm as clever as I do, but this is actually 2 books. You know, I did the first book called One Dead in Attic, and then we were about to self-publish a second follow-up book to that, that we were going to call The Upside Down Purple Car, based on something my son had said when he saw the lower 9th Ward for the first time. What he said was, upside down purple car. And sure enough, there was an upside down purple car on the side of the road, and that's when I really felt that I'd caught the perfect metaphor for New Orleans. I think New Orleans is the upside down purple car. And we thought that would be a nice companion piece. We were going to do the same thing. I was going to work with Charlie Varley, who shot the pictures in the Little Red Book, but whom Simon and Schuster did not hire to do our book. And what was it? Well, Charlie and I did the first book together, and from that moment on, we became blood brothers and swore that we would go swinging into the horizon, saving New Orleans and publishing together. Then Simon and Schuster came along and offered me a deal and didn't want him, and so I said to Charlie one day, I wish you the best in your career. What would you have done? What would you have done? So that was the second book. We wrapped them both into this one. Now the next book I'm going to do, I don't know, but I will tell you this. Simon or Schuster, I'm not sure which. They are very pleased with what happened to this book. I don't think they really had that high expectations with it. They wanted to secure my services at their company but I told them that the next book I was going to do was this one. So they did that to kind of test the waters with me. And I don't know if you know this, but we did make the New York Times bestseller list for a number of weeks, due entirely to anti-Oprah sentiment. And if you want, I can tell that story in a minute. That's book talk there. But Simon or Schuster, whoever the guy was, met a couple weeks ago at a high-level meeting in New York, and they seem pretty willing to work with me on another book. But I don't know what to do. This, I don't know how to write novels, but this nonfiction is killing me. Oprah, should we do Oprah? All right. If you know the Oprah story, please raise your hand. Okay. This one takes a while. Here. Crack myself up. Who's in the other big chamber, right? What are y'all missing for this? Anything else going on? There probably is nothing else, huh? This room's pretty crowded. Oprah. Okay, so the week before the second anniversary of the storm, my book's timing was very fortunate. This year, nobody had a major documentary coming out on the storm, and there were really, Josh Clark had the only other book about Katrina that came out, and his had come out much earlier in the summer. So I was kind of the hot commodity at the time for the talking heads, who had finally realized that Doug Brinkley had written 7 books since his flood book and now lived in Texas, so was probably no longer useful as the single, solitary, and only talking head to represent New Orleans for the past 18 months. So they were stuck having to look around. Doug and I are good friends, so don't get me wrong. So I was sort of the go-to guy for a lot of the media, and they were lining me up. On August 29th, I was on the CBS Morning News. I was on NBC Nightly thing with Brian Williams. I was on ABC's World News Tonight, and a couple other things, I guess. But I was also scheduled that day. Something had happened about a week before, where I was contacted by one of Oprah's producers. Now, you may or may not know this, but if you're at a book festival, you probably know a little bit about the publishing industry, and that is that if Oprah says the name of your book on her show, you sell 10 million copies that day. You're a made guy. My dream comes true. I'm out of here. I'm now living a shoes-optional lifestyle on some island in the Caribbean with my kids. You all can start amusing yourself in the morning at the Times-Picayune with somebody else. Again, I'm out of here. Okay. So the producer calls and says, we'd like to feature you on the Oprah show on August 29th. And I'm going, and so I'm really thinking, this is it. This is amazing. I'm Jonathan Franzen, or who else? James Fry. So we go through these discussions, and it turns out, she says, you need to know this. We're not going to mention your book on the show. I said, well, I just had a book come out. It's about Katrina. The hell do you mean we're not going to mention the book on the show? They said, we're doing a piece on the mental health crisis in New Orleans. Which, unfortunately, I am a experienced and overqualified speaker for. And I said, well, but that's in the book. If we talk about that, you'd want to tell your readers about the book so they can read more. They said, we can't do it. It's very complicated. Publishers go crazy. If Oprah says the name of the book, it sells too many copies. And I'm going, exactly. Cut a guy a break. You know I'm crazy. You know I'm depressed. For God's sakes, help me. And so they just couldn't do it. And I said, well, all right, we'll just do the piece, whatever. I'm thinking Simon and Schuster want me to at least get my name out there. So I remember when they came over to the apartment, I positioned the books on my desk behind me where I would talk, and they go, no, 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 no. And when they talk about my circumstances, my situation, I would liberally drop in references. Well, as I said in my book, again, she goes, please, stop that. So I realize now that I was not going to be singled out as the author of a riveting and must-read book on the matter of Katrina, but that I was going to be presented to 40 million soccer moms on Wednesday, August 29th, as the most depressed man in America. They even asked me, honest to God, they asked me, they do the cut, they do the interview stuff, and then they do, watching TV, man, it's like sausage. I can't watch TV anymore now that I know how it works. And so they do the cutaway thing. We'd like you now to stand out on your balcony and stare off into space. What for? And they said, well, we want to capture you in this mood that we're talking about. And I said, but I feel better now. I'm not depressed. Particularly today. I'm getting there. If we keep this interview going for a few more hours, you can get the 1,000-yard stare out of me. So listen, why don't you sit on the couch and, when you just stare off, what do you look like? And I go, I don't sit on the couch and just stare off anymore. I'm fine. I'm off my meds. I exercise. I'm okay. But they do that stuff, so there's me. So that's what goes out to 40 million homes instead of any mention in my book. Now, in the process of making this show, filming it for 16 hours in one day, at the end of the day, they asked me to sign a release that would say that in my professional capacity as a reporter, writer of books, or anything else, that I would sign a confidentiality agreement that I would never talk about the filming of the Oprah or appearing on the Oprah show. And I said, what are you talking about? I said, weren't you supposed to give me this before we shot 16 hours of film? And I looked at it, and I thought, well, they're not mentioned in my book. I said, hell, I'm getting at least one good column out of this, and I refused to sign it. And they said, if you don't sign it, we can't put the piece on the air. I said, I don't care. You made me look terrible. I said, you made me look so bad. I said, not only, A, you're not mentioning my book, but now I can't get laid out of this because I'm going to look so crappy on TV. I said, this is doing me no good. You should hear how I talk in church. Sorry. So I didn't sign it, and so because I realized I'm going to write a story about this. People need to know what happened. So I wrote a story that ran on the same day as the Oprah show, in which they showed me, as I predicted they would, the most depressed man in America. But I wrote a story about this whole process and how, just the story that I just told you is what I wrote. And man, this thing got flamed out around the internet, huge. People were just passing this thing all along. And here's what happened. I did not know there was such a virulent, what's that word? How do you say that? Yeah. Intense anti-Oprah sentiment in this country. But there are, and I'll tell you, based on Amazon.com sales, purchases by disgruntled writers throughout the United States, my book shot onto the New York Times bestseller list the next week. I got hundreds of emails and phone calls from people saying, good on you, dude. I'm buying your book today. And apparently a lot of them did. I got a phone call from a guy in Savannah, Georgia, said, I'm a writer too, man. Way to go, dude. You stood up for all of us. I can't even pay my electric bill, but I'm buying your book today. I'm going, wow. I love Oprah. I think she's an agent for great change. I just wanted her on my book. I'm not Jonathan Franzen, man. I want Oprah to love me. I want to be on her TV show and make women across America cry. But people took my story to be a manifesto of anti-Oprah sentiment, and I swear to God, I mean, Simon and Schuster said, we'll never get another author on Oprah, but you just got us a bestseller out of that. And so the next best thing to having your book mentioned on Oprah is to not have your book mentioned on Oprah. So that next edition that they print of One Dead Addict will not only say a New York Times bestseller, but as not seen on Oprah. What are you clapping for? Like this is a performance. It's a very sarcastic deal, but I mean, it's true, and I try to couch it in some kind of weird language, but a natural disaster is a very good career move for somebody in my line of work. Look what it did for me. I'm standing here in front of you guys instead of stalking Lindsay Lohan in the college bars in New Orleans anymore. So, I mean, for a lot of us won Pulitzer Prizes because we won with 2 entries, one for breaking news and one for public service. And between those 2, there were 27 bylines. So 27 of us got these nice little individual statues. And that's real good if you want to go to a bigger paper or a bigger city and do work there. And a lot of my colleagues from the newspaper have done exactly that. A lot of guys in my business, the idea is you just work for the biggest paper you can. You start at the bottom and you climb up and up and up. I've been kind of the opposite. I mean, I actually started at the Washington Post, and now I'm at the Times-Picayune. I'm figuring, pretty soon I'm at the Home Courier. I'm building a resume in reverse. That's just my lifestyle choice. I'm not saying it's for everybody. But, so a lot of guys have taken their Pulitzers and gone on to go cover City Hall at the Philadelphia Inquirer, which is really cool. But the fact is, this is my last newspaper job. I cannot imagine covering the magnitude, the sorrow, the universal horror and pain and shame of this whole thing. And then going off to another newspaper and just covering a regular beat. Because the fact is, I wouldn't care. The emotional investment into what we're doing is so intense that I don't really understand how these guys can go off and do that sort of thing. But these are the same guys who I didn't understand back in the couple months after the storm who weren't going crazy and weren't going mad. They'd get up every day and go to work like this was a really cool and exciting story, which it was. But it had no, I guess it's like the difference. I would equate a lot of it to the Vietnam movies, man. There's some guys who just folded, collapsed, curled into a fetal position in the foxhole. And there are these other guys who just, got up and started shooting the enemy. And a lot of these guys were able to do that. And I wasn't, So I lost my train of thought there, that's for sure. What was the question? Thank you all for coming. I don't know.
Award-winning writer David Kirby is the author of more than 20 books. Kirby is a distinguished professor at Florida State University, where he's taught for over 40 years. A member of the National Book Critics Circle, he often writes for the New York Times Book Review. Kirby shares poetry and an essay from his latest works.
This poem is called The Little Sisters of the Sacred Heart, and it's about the birth of my son, William, known in the family as Evil Dr. Will, because he's been on these reality, he is a doctor, he's a dermatologist, but he's been on these reality TV shows like Big Brother 2 and Big Brother 7. He's on one now called Dr. 90210 on the E! Entertainment channel. And he was born in a casa di cura in Florence, in Italy. These silly Italians, they don't think that pregnant people are sick. So they don't send pregnant women to the hospital to get cured of their pregnancy. They send them to special birthing hospitals called Casa di Cura. So, but the poem, this is a David Kirby poem now, remember, so it doesn't start in Italy, it starts in Scotland, okay? The Little Sisters of the Sacred Heart. I'm bouncing across the Scottish heath in a rented Morris Minor, and listening to an interview with Rat Scabies, drummer of the first punk band, The Damned. And Mr. Scabies, who's probably 50 or so, and living comfortably on royalties, is as recalcitrant as ever, as full of despair and self-loathing. But the interviewer won't have it, and he keeps calling him Ratty, and saying, Ratty, it's all a bit of a put-on, isn't it? And, you're just pulling the old leg now, aren't you, Ratty? To which Mr. Scabies keeps saying things like, we're fucked, you daft prat. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Fucked. Funny old Ratty. He believed in nothing, which is something. If it weren't for summit, there'd be naught, as they say in that part of the world. I wonder if his dad wasn't a bit of a bastard, didn't drink himself to death, say, as opposed to a dad like mine who, though also dead now, was as nice as he could be when he was still alive. A month before, I'd been in Florence, and I walked by the Casa di Cura where my son Will was born 27 years ago. Though it's not a hospital now, but a home for the old nuns of Le Suore Minime del Sacro Cuore, who helped to deliver and bathe and care for him when he was just a few minutes old. And when I look over the gate, I see 3 of these holy sisters sitting in the garden there, and I wave at them, and they wave back. And I wonder if they were on duty when Will was born. These women who have had no sex at all, probably not even very much candy, yet who believe in something that may be nothing after all, though I love them for giving me my boy. They're dozing and talking, these mystical brides of Christ, and thinking about their husband, and it looks to me as though they're having their version of the Sacra Conversazione, a favorite subject of Renaissance artists in which people who care for one another are painted chatting together about noble things. And I'm wondering if, as I walk by later, when the shadows are long, will their white faces be like stars against their black habits, the 3 of them a constellation about to rise into the vault that arches over Tuscany, the fires there now twinkling, now steadfast in the chambered heart of the sky. I have this book called Ultra Talk, which the title of it kind of says the whole thing, because I try to be conversational in the essays, but I try to bring in lots of voices, so it's not just talk, it's ultra. The first essay in the book actually is called A Shot a Man in Corleone, because Barbara and I were in Sicily, and we're not millionaires. We're not. I think we might be hundredaires. I don't think we're even thousandaires at this point. But Florida State has a study center in Florence where I teach whenever I can. And in fact, we're anti-millionaires, come to think of it, because the euro is like worth $1.40 now. So I mean, it's like a hemorrhage to go over there, but it's worth us, So we don't go over there to live it up. We go over there to kind of live it down, but live it up in spiritual and artistic ways. And we took a little trip to Sicily, and I began to hear these Johnny Cash songs in my head. The way you'll hear some song from your childhood when you see a fireside, chat going on or something. There's no real reason for it except that it kept coming back, and I realized that those songs, those Folsom Prison kind of songs, I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die, come from a hardscrabble life, a life where people are poor and hungry and therefore angry, which is what Sicily is still like. That's why the mafia started there. So that too is a kind of braid of American country music and my Sicilian observations. Let's go back to Florence for a second. One afternoon, Barbara and I arrive in Florence, fall exhausted into bed, and stroll out later in search of a trattoria. But there's crowd noise from the Piazza della Signoria, so we stroll over to see what's going on. It's the orchestra of the Maggio Musicale, the city's music festival, playing Beethoven's Ninth Symphony to a crowd of several thousand listeners of every type. Backpackers from all over Europe, young parents pushing prams, school children chasing each other around the legs of big people, carabinieri, Africans peddling Gucci knockoffs, Asians selling bamboo birds, teenagers who can't keep their hands off each other, drunks, older couples strolling arm in arm, gypsies, the homeless, business people pausing on their way home to whistle a bar or two. The crowd is so big and varied that, of course, it commits the musical lover's cardinal sin of clapping and cheering lustily when the orchestra pauses between movements. But so what? It's summer, it's outdoors, and it's Florence where the great modern experiment begins, where architects and scientists and political thinkers and artists and poets like Brunelleschi and Leonardo and Machiavelli and Michelangelo and Dante lived and worked within a few streets of each other and almost at the same time, banked by wealthy merchant families like the Medici, who, far from finding art and learning mysterious or daunting, competed with one another to buy the most books, commissioned the loveliest paintings, and erect statues, most likely to strike the viewer dumb like those still standing in the piazza today. Art, ideas, beauty, there for everybody. The crowd seems to be saying as it sends skyward its own odes to joy. The idea for a book on king-sized cultural monuments, which is what Ultra Talk is about, had been buzzing in my head for several years when I came across these words in an interview with Primo Levi, Auschwitz survivor and one of the greatest, and considering his achievement, one of the most neglected writers of the 20th century. Both Goethe and Leopardi said that a book is valid only once it has been accepted by an intellectual elite followed by a vast public. If it fails on one or the other count, there's something wrong with it. Okay, so a book has to be accepted, first of all, by the elite, and then second of all, by everybody. Think Shakespeare. I mean, obviously English professors pay the bills with Shakespeare, but 8th grade school kids laugh at As You Like It and Twelfth Night. I mean, it's something for everybody. But if that's true for Shakespeare, isn't it true for songs, movies, food, pleasures of every kind? What is most valuable is not that which is great because experts say so, or popular because people buy a lot of it, but both. So my subjects are things which are valuable because everybody values them. Poets and waiters, journalists and mechanics, scientists and short order cooks. And I also add a third element to that formula. It has to be popular with the elite, it has to be popular with the masses. It also has to be truly colossal. A cultural phenomenon has to be valued by everyone repeatedly and over a period of time. So, I mean, go back to Shakespeare. We'll never run out of ways to stage and enjoy Shakespeare. So when I was thinking about this book earlier, I was just thinking of writing about the big boys, and most of them are boys, Shakespeare and Whitman, because I think of them as giants who kind of walk by my house at 1168 Seminole Drive in Tallahassee and kind of, hunker down and peek in the window. They're always kind of looking in at me, so I wanted to go out and meet them. But then Evil Dr. Will sort of forced a piece on me because he got on this reality TV show called Big Brother 2, and he won it. He won $500,000. So I said, well, I need to write about television. And then I thought, well, okay, why don't I write about auto racing, advertising, Dante, the English language, folk music, food, France, Leonardo, movies, poetry, recreational vehicles, religion, storytelling, striptease, travel, and the World Wide Web. And they're all in my book. So the idea is not, this isn't one of those, let's include something for everybody, where you like a cafeteria where you eat the beets but you skip everything else. I guess most people would skip the beats, wouldn't they? But you get the idea. I didn't want to have something for everybody. It's the opposite of that. I wanted to pick topics that people in the developed world, regardless of income or class or level of education, have studied, read about, been to, sought avidly, resisted vigorously, and discussed passionately in coffee houses and saloons and chat rooms. So I write about Paris, for example. Yeah, billionaires walk through Paris, but so do beggars. There's an essay on Bernini's famous statue of St. Teresa in ecstasy, and heads of state go to see that statue and they kneel before it, but so do people who can't read. And everyone watches television, so that's what I'm up to. And most of the pieces in my book involve physical walking around. I mean, there's research there, but there's a great tradition of walking in literature. Wallace Stevens composed his poems as he walked. Wordsworth and Coleridge were great walkers, walking 20 miles a day sometimes. Dickens would walk at night, as he said, to still my beating mind. So there's a real connection, and so. At the end of a good day, both my head and my feet are tired. That's the idea. So I go to and come from Florence in this book, and a lot of times people say when I give a reading or presentation somewhere, they'll say, "I know you'll write about Europe a lot. Why?" And kind of like. I didn't know it was a bad thing, but I mean, the answer is I have a lot of time to write there, because otherwise, I'm really busy in the States. But when I go over there to teach those classes at the FSU Study Center, I don't have to go to faculty meetings. I don't have to, wrangle all these memos and stuff like that. So I have a lot of time to write, and I'm the opposite of a snob. So I don't think I'm better than people who are staying at home. In fact, I feel more and more American because, and this needs to be credited to Barbara Hamby, the luminous poet Barbara Hamby, who's my wife, she says, there's nothing that makes you feel more American than trying to get your dry cleaning back in a language that you can't really speak, you know. So it's and you know, Florence is the city of Dante, who's a great model of the great walkers. I mean, he walked to hell, didn't he? Then he walked through purgatory, and he walked all the way up to heaven, which is a mountain in his thing. So he shows up in this book as well. And as I say, as I abandoned my original idea of writing about giants like Shakespeare and Whitman, I also changed the way that I wrote. And yet, as different as they are, the 17 or 18 pieces in my essay collection of essays, the 17 or 18 chapters, they all have a similar methodology. So there's a piece in there on NASCAR, for example, and I'd read articles by intellectuals about NASCAR culture, but it finally occurred to me I'd never read anything by anybody who'd ever been to a race. So I figured I'd better do that. So I got a commission from the Christian Science Monitor to write a news story, and then I set out for Talladega with no idea of what it was going to be like, but I used the same principles I use for anything else. First of all, read everything, because I didn't know a thing about car racing. Then when you get to the infield, start walking and just start talking to people. And it's just like a form of magic. Don't worry about getting lost. It's probably better if you get lost, because you're going to meet more interesting people, and they'll not only will they say outlandish things, but they'll say, well, you have to go talk to Tiny. He's over here, and Tiny is like a 300-pound guy with a little white dog, and he's got stories that you've never heard before. So walk, talk to everybody you meet. Above all, listen. Keep your mouth shut and listen, and then retrace your steps and begin to write. So I wanted to write a piece on drum music because drums are the only instrument that everyone plays, from toddlers to seniors, because with the exception of you former prodigies here in the room today, you probably didn't start playing the clarinet when you were 4 years old, but I know you dragged your mama's pots and pans out and probably still do, So, I went to a lot of concerts, drum concerts, Japanese and Korean drum concerts, and gamelan and all this good noisy stuff. But this is from the personal part of the essay. I was a junior in high school at the height of the folk music craze. As David Haydu points out in Positively 4th Street, the folk movement took root in the culture in a way that no other musical phenomenon ever would, even rock. After all, it's a lot easier to learn 3 chords on an acoustic guitar and call yourself a folk singer than it is to staff and equip an electrified band. The biggest of the groups was the Kingston Trio. And within days of appearance of the Kingston Trio's Close-Up album in 1961, my friends Al Edwards, Bob Spain, and I decided that the road to glory was paved with guitar picks and banjo strings. Bob was a talented guitarist already. Al was one of those musicians who could see a new instrument, wonder aloud how it works, and within 5 minutes be playing St. James Infirmary or Latin Doll. Since he already owned a banjo, though, that took care of that slot, which left me. I knew maybe 10 chords and could play rhythm guitar if someone else tuned the instrument, but since Bob was a much better player, it was decided I'd be the rhythm section, playing slap bass and bongos. Now, the bass was a problem, since it's not the kind of instrument that's priced for a teenager's budget. Our school had one, and Mr. Daigle, the music teacher, let me use it for practice. One day I got up my nerve to ask him if I could borrow the instrument. Having been exasperated by musical incompetence for decades, Mr. Daigle had the stereotypical short temper of his breed, and as he contemplated my effrontery in silence, it seemed to me that his face grew even more purple than usual. Finally, Mr. Daigle spoke. Yes, he said, I could borrow the bass, but I had to help him out with a problem. It seemed that the music department needed a new piano, yet couldn't have one as long as the old piano still worked, however cacophonously. More hints were dropped, and before long I was given to understand that if my friends and I would dispose of the old piano, I could borrow the bass any time it wasn't being used for a school concert. Bob and Al were aghast at the plan. Al, in particular, had had brushes with the law and was not about to add Grand Theft Piano to his rap sheet. So he turned to our friend Bertrand, the closest real-life equivalent to Tom Sawyer that I know, and someone who would have been incensed not to have this opportunity for glory and possible incarceration. So Bertrand asked to borrow Mr. Daigle's pickup truck. One Saturday morning we went over to school. Lo and behold, the door to the music room was mysteriously open. We rolled the piano on the truck and took it up somewhere in North Baton Rouge and dumped it out in the field. It kind of went clang, clang, clang like that. And now we had our bass. Then I needed a set of bongos, so I talked my mother into an early birthday present, and we were good to go. Finally, the assistant principal booked us for a show in our school cafeteria, and we had to face our final challenge, naming ourselves. Since the whole point was to sound as much as possible like the Kingston Trio, names like the Folksmen or the U-High Singers came and went, as eventually did Bob, Al, and Dave, which is who we were during our incubatory stage. No, we had to be the blank trio, though the search for the word that would substitute for the blank kept us up nights and caused more than one practice session to end in slammed cases and huffy exits. So, we tried the Regency Trio, but, that was just too snotty. 3 days before the show, we still had no name, and the girl who was making the posters was getting insistent. Al's parents used to vacation on Dauphin Island off the Alabama shore, and he proposed that we be the Dauphin Trio. I don't want to be named after no friggin' fish, said Bob. The night we played, we ran through the songs we knew: Tom Dooley, Charlie and the MTA, Long Black Veil, They Call the Wind Mariah, and when, unbelievably, our audience begged for an encore, Tom Dooley again, since we had exhausted our entire repertory. When the show was over, 4 of the bustiest girls in our school ran up and squealed, "You sound exactly like the Triad." What were they talking about? None of us could sing at all. Bob and Al should have practiced more and squabbled less. And I tried to mask my incompetent bass slapping and bongo thumping with manic ethnic shouts of the kind I imagined a gaucho would make while singing beside a campfire on the Pampas. The best thing you could say about us is that we didn't forget any of the words and that we more or less began and ended together. Other than that, we were terrible. I've never been happier in my life. The Dauphin Trio played another dozen dates or so and actually had a brief flirtation with the commercial side of music. Al's uncle, who was something of a hustler, proposed he take us on the road for the summer. We'd play mainly in the high school gymnasiums of towns so isolated that people who couldn't make it to Vicksburg or Montgomery to hear real musicians might actually pay to hear us. But our mothers said no. They gave no reasons, but I'm guessing now they saw us falling into the clutches of hard women, desperate small-town divorcees who'd introduce us to cigarettes, underage drinking, and worse. After a few feeble cries of, "Oh, Ma," we gave up, realizing we really didn't care all that much about being famous and rich. Local girls liked us, and mainly, we just liked to play. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Louisiana Book Talks is produced in cooperation with the Center for the Book in the State Library of Louisiana and made possible in part by a grant from the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities.